So it all starts with the major scale, which is just a random pattern that people have just decided sounds good, and everything is just built off that. So if you look at a piano, there's 12 possible notes that you can play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then just repeats after that. And the major scale is just picking 7 of those notes in a certain pattern. So the pattern is, I'd say 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And it's because it's 2 between 1 and 2 because it skips that note, 2 between 2 and 3 because it skips that note, 3 to 4 it's just a 1 because there's no skip, 4 to 5 it's a 2 because there's a skip, 5 to 6 there's a skip, and 6 to 7 there's a skip. So I've wrote that little thing here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can see there's a skip of 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And this is all the possible major scales. So it's just starting on different notes, the same pattern every single time. So if you just picked F, for example, so you start here, which is an F, and then you do a 2, because you skip that one, 2 again, because you skip that one, and then a 1, because you go from 3 to 4, there's no skip, and then 4 to 5 goes back to here, and there's a skip, and then 5 to 6 there's a skip, so it's a 2, 6 to 7 it's a skip, so it's a 2, and then 7 to 1 there's no skip, so it's just a 1 again. And you can use that to start on any note to get all the major scales. So if you look at the piano, it actually makes it really easy to remember that 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 pattern, because the black keys just show that. Because you see there's a 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So wherever there's a black key, there's a 2, and wherever there isn't a black key, there's a 1. So if you're doing guitar, it's exactly the same thing. So if it will just do C, so C to D is a 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, and then A to B is a 2, and then B to C is a 1. So it's the same pattern again, but guitar, you usually go to the down the fretboard, which is that way. So, but you see that note's the same as that, and that note's the same as that, and then that note's the same as that, and then so on. So you can go down the fretboard like that. So you go 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So it's just the same pattern. So I've done that like this on here. So you see that's that C there. So this is going down the fretboard on this thing, and this is going down the fretboard on this thing. So you start with that C there, and that's a 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, and so on. And then the same thing, you just have to know where each of the notes are for different scales. So if you're starting on an A, so if you're doing an A scale, so you see this thing here shows an A is there, which is that thing there, and then you just follow the pattern. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can just write all the major scales like that. Simple as that. So the next thing is chromatic notes. So chromatic notes are just all the notes that are not in the major scale. So if you're playing the C scale, remember we said that all the white notes are in the major scale and all the black notes are not in the major scale, so all the black notes would be the chromatic notes. So between 1 and 2, there would be a chromatic note, which is the C sharp, and then between 2 and 3, there's a chromatic, and then between 4 and 5, there's a chromatic, between 5 and 6 is chromatic, between 6 and 7 there's a chromatic. So you can just label them however you want, so you can do like 1 sharp or flat 2, or just whatever suits you. Sharps and flats are the same thing, they're just different ways of describing it. So if you did it on guitar, it's exactly the same thing. So between 1 and 2 there's a chromatic, just like between 1 and 2 there's a chromatic there. Between 2 and 3 there's a chromatic there, which is a flat 3 or a sharp 2, which is the same as that one. It's the same thing, you just do it for all the different major scales. So the next thing is chords, and chords are just multiple notes played together, and they're all named using the major scale system. Okay, and all chords have a root, which is the 1 of a chord, and it's usually the lowest note. And so if you look through my guitar things, I put R's where there should be ones, and that's just to say that it's a root. Okay, and if you look at that, if you look at the piano, all the ones can be replaced with roots. It's the same kind of idea. Okay, so if you want to play a C major chord, you just go to the C major scale and play the 1, 3, 5, which is the major chord formula, and then you'd get the C major chord. So you just play that, and that together, the 1, 3, 5, and you get the C chord. So if you want to play G major, you just go to the G major scale and you play 1, 3, 5 in the G major scale, and you get the G major chord. If you wanted to do D minor, you just play the 1, flat 3, 5, that's a flat 3. And so you'd go to the D major scale, and so you'd go 1, flat 3, so it's a flat of the 3, and then 5, and you get the D minor. And you can just use these different formulas and different scales to get different chords. And there's loads of different chord formulas that you can get, loads of different chords. So chords are exactly the same on the guitar, so you just have to use the open strings to get all the notes that your fingers can't. So if you want to play an E minor, you go to the E major scale, which is here, and then you use the E minor formula. So you want to try and find wherever there's a 1, flat 3, 5, and 1 is the same as an R on this diagram here. So all you do is you try and make a shape where you can play 1, flat 3, and 5. So you see you've got some roots here, and you've got the 5s there, and you've got a flat 3 there. So you want to try and make a shape using all those. And since all of those are behind the nut, they're open strings, you can just play, you only have to put your fingers on these two to make the shape. So you just play the root, the 5, the root, flat 3, 5, and root. And that's how you actually understand what an E minor chord is. So that's playing the root, the flat 3, and the 5 of the E major scale to make the E minor chord. So the next thing is the diatonic system, but first you need to talk about keys. So keys are based off, again, major scales. So it's just what major scale you're using, that's what key you are in. So if you're using the C major scale, you'd be considered to be in the key of C. And the diatonic system is making 7 different chords starting on the 7 different notes of the major scale. So if you start, and the pattern for the diatonic would be you play the first note, and then you skip 1 and you play the next note, and then you skip 1 and then you play the next note. So I'll show you how that works. So if you start on the first note, the first note of the C major scale, you skip 1 and you play the 3, you skip 1 and you play the 5, and that's considered the first chord of the C major scale. And then so if you started on the 2, you'd skip again the first note, so you go to the 4, and then you skip again and you go to the 6. So if you want to play the second chord of C, you'd play 2, 4, 6, and the same pattern it goes again. So the third chord would be 3, 5, 7, the next fourth chord would be 4, 6, 1, and then the fifth one would be 5, 7, 2, 6, 1, 6, 1, 3, etc. So now we have to name each of the qualities of each of the chords in the diatonic system. So let's name the second chord, see what the second chord is. So we'll try it in the key of C, and you know that the second chord plays 2, 4, 6 in the key. So we're in the key of C, so we're going to play 2, 4, 6 there, and then you know you have to name the root. You have to name the chord based on what the root is, which is the lowest note. So we're playing 2, 4, 6 here, and the lowest note is 2. So therefore a D. If you see that note there, that's a D. And then so we go to the D major scale to name what actually the 2, 4, 6 chord is in the key of C. So we're playing the same notes here. So the 2 would be that one, and then the 4 would be this flat 3, and then the 6 would be that 5 there. So what we're actually playing according to the key of D is a 1, a flat 3, and a 5, and that's a minor chord. So you can say the second chord in the diatonic system is a minor chord, and you can use that same logic to find each of the qualities of each of the 7 chords of the diatonic system. So you would find that the first chord is a major chord, the second chord is a minor chord, the third chord is a minor chord, the fourth chord is a major chord, the fifth chord is a major chord, the sixth chord is a minor chord, and the seventh chord is a diminished chord. And that applies for all the different keys. So you just have to remember the first, fourth, and fifth is a major chord in any key, and the second, third, and the sixth is a minor chord, and the seventh chord is a diminished chord. So let's find all the diatonic chords in the key of D. So the first chord, it starts from the first note in the key of D. So we're going to be playing a D, and then the diatonic system says the first chord is a major, so we're going to be playing a D major. The second chord starts on the second note, which is an E, and the diatonic system says it's going to be minor, so we're going to be playing an E minor. So the second chord in the key of D would be an E minor. So the third chord is going to be starting on the third note, which is an F sharp, and the diatonic system says it's going to be minor, so we're going to be playing an F sharp minor, which will be our third chord in the diatonic system in the key of D. And then using the same logic, we'll find that we're going to get a G major, and then an A major as the fifth chord, and the sixth chord is going to be a B minor, and the seventh chord is going to be a C sharp diminished. And that system applies to all the keys. So you can find all the diatonic chords in every key using this way. So next is non-diatonic chords. So non-diatonic chords are just every other chord that doesn't fit the diatonic system. So if you're in the key of D, you know you're in the key of D or using the D major scale, you would only be allowed, according to the diatonic system, to play the D major, the E minor, the F sharp minor, the G major, the A major, the B minor, and the C sharp diminished chords according to the diatonic system for the key of D. So if you played something like E major, that would be a non-diatonic chord because you're meant to be playing E minor. If you played A minor, you're meant to be playing A major according to the diatonic system, so that would be called a non-diatonic chord if you played A minor in the key of D. So lots of people put non-diatonic chords into keys in order to make it a bit more interesting, but it can also lead you into going into a different key. Okay, so there's also things called minor scales and modes, but they're all just the major scale if you look at them properly. So if you do a major scale normally, you go from the 1 and then to the next 1. So you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and then like that's considered the major scale. But if you started on a different number and went to the same number again, that would be considered a mode or a minor scale, depending on which number you started and ended on. So, for example, if you started on the 6 and you went 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, still in the key of C, that they would call that the A minor scale. But you can see it's still the major scale, but in C, but they like to call it A minor. And you have to learn a whole new scale just to know how to do that. But if you know things like this, you understand how it works, you don't need to do any of that. And then they also have different modes. So like if you start on the 2 and you go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, that people would call that the D Dorian because it starts on the D and it's like doing the second mode, so going from the 2 to the 2. But it's still the C major scale. You don't need to learn another scale and do all this crazy stuff because it's just the same scale starting and ending at different points instead of just the 1 to 1, which is the normal major scale. So you don't really need to learn all these minor scales and modes because it's just the same major scale like that we've always been talking about. And people say that the minor scale focuses is completely different because it just has a different sound to it, but it doesn't. It just focuses on different chords of the diatonic system. So on the diatonic system, normally you'd focus on the 1, 4, 5 chords, which is the first chord is the major chord, and the second chord, the fourth chord is the major chord, and the fifth chord is the major chord. So you'd focus on the 1, 4, 5. But in the minor, in what they call the minor scale, they would focus on the 6, 2, and 3 chords, the minor chords. So that's what they would call the minor chords. They would call that's what the minor scale is. That they're just like focusing on those kind of things. But it's just the same thing. You don't need to make all these extra things. It's just focusing on different parts of the major scale and the diatonic system. That's all modes and minor keys and scales are. Yeah, so in terms of chord progressions, there's this thing called cycle of fourths, which again is just something that our ears have just decided randomly that we like the sound of, and that's about it. And they do use it quite often in songs, so it's just saying that you should go up in fourths. So, for example, if you're playing the first chord you should go to the fourth chord next. And if you're in the third chord, you should go to the sixth chord next. Again, it's all in diatonic, so that would be a 3 minor chord going to a 6 minor, and it's just a fourth thing like that you're just going up and forth all the time. But obviously they don't do that in every single song, because then every song will just sound the same. But it's just quite often they do go like from the first chord to the fourth chord, and like from the second chord to the fifth chord, and the third chord to the sixth chord, for example. And they do often go backwards, like cycle of fifths, so they would go back this way. So they go from the sixth chord to the 3 chord, and the 4 chord to the 1 chord. It's just a theory of like what to do next if you're on a chord, but it's just a theory that like intellectuals like to dance around with. Cadences are another thing that intellectuals love talking about. Like, cadences are just something that happens at the end of a section of a song. So a 5-1 cadence would be like the 5 chord going to a 1 chord at the end of a section of a song, and that would be called a perfect cadence. And then the same thing for a plagal, so it'll be going from a 4 chord to a 1 chord at the end of a bit of a song. And then an imperfect would be going from any chord to a 5 chord. So what cadences theory is that they're saying that it should give a certain feeling based on which chord goes to what chord. So though there are millions of different cadences that intellectuals have come up with, these are the only ones that I reckon are, like, most people agree with, are the ones that actually are real. So the perfect cadence, which is a real feeling of like finality, that it's like finished, and plagal is similar but not as intense, that it's like a finished bit. And then imperfect is the opposite, so it's like doesn't feel finished at all. And that's basically all there is of cadences. There are, like I said, there's loads of different things that people have come up with, like a 6-1, like an Aeolian cadence or something, but it's just a theory. It's not really real, it's just a theory. So we've also got inversions, voicings, and slash chords. So all they are is just different orderings of the same chord. So usually, like when you play the C chord, you play the 1, 3, 5 in that order. So 5 would be the highest note, the G would be the highest note. But if you rearrange the same chord so that you did like the E, G, and then C, that would be like an inversion of the C chord. It's the same chord, it's just a different voicing of it. And we do inversions and voicings all the time on the guitar without knowing it, because it's more relevant to piano, where you can control more of the stuff. With guitar, you're limited by the fretboard and your fingers, what they can play. So the inversions don't matter that much as piano. So with guitar, if you look at the like D chord, for example, the highest note is a 3. So that's kind of like an inversion, because you're not doing it the normal way, as in like root 3, 5 is the usual way of playing a major chord. If you look at the C, again, the highest note is a 3. If you look at a G, the highest note is a root, so it's not really inverted, but it's just they're all just basically just voicings of the same chord. And a slash chord is you just play a chord and then you change the bass note to another note. So for example, if you did a C/G chord, all you do is you just play the C chord normally, so root 3, 5, or you can do an inversion if you want to, and then you put a G as the lowest note, so you'd stick another G below that. So you'd play the C chord and you'd just have a G note in the bass, or you can move that 5G there to be below the C, so it'd be like a G, C, E, what you're actually playing. And they do that quite a lot in guitar. So like if you play the C, and then you, instead of muting that top string there, and you play the open string, so it would be a 3, you're playing a C/E. So you got E in the bass, which is a 3, and then you're playing the C, and then you're playing the normal C chord. So it's just the slash chord is just changing the bass note or the lowest note. Okay, so one of the things that I really like about using numbers instead of all the note names and everything is you have a lot of freedom to improvise and jump between keys and things like that, because everything's all in front of you with the numbers. So, for example, I've just drawn up this thing, which is just a random thing showing you the gaps on the major scale on the guitar fretboard. So, like, this is just saying that this is the first where we're starting, and then there's a gap of 2. So that's just the major scale gap from 1 to 2, and then again from 2 to 3 there's a gap, and then 3 to 4 there's no gap, so on for the major scale. And I've done that across all the strings in that same pattern, because you can see that 4 lines up with that 4 there, which is the same on the fretboard. So I've just made everything line up so that you have this kind of block of all these numbers, and you can use that to like solo wherever you want and go wherever you want with improvisation. So let's say that you want to solo in the key of E. So all you have to do is you have to match, like you have to find an E on this thing, on all the guitar notes, and you just have to match that on this, and then you just know where you are with all the numbers for that key. So let's do this one. So let's pick this E here, and all we've got to do is you just got to find an E, or we've got to find a 1, on this thing, a 1 or a root on this thing, and then just line it up to see which thing it is. So there's an E here on the 3rd string, and there's a 1 here on the 3rd string. So this now, because it's an E, because this is actually the 2nd fret on the actual guitar. So you just make this the 2nd fret. So this column here is now the 2nd fret, and then so everything lines up as so. So this would be the 2nd fret. This would be the 1st fret. This would be the nut, and this would be the 3rd fret, etc. And it just shows you all the notes you can play when you're in the key of E, or you can use a different one. So like if you pick this E here, you just got to find a root on the 2nd string, which is here. So then that just has to line up with that. So this is the 5th fret. So now this becomes the 5th fret. And then it shows you all the numbers around it that you can play that's still in the key of E. So it gives you a lot of freedom to really go over you want with improvisation. And then this is just a shortcut where it's showing you all, like if you're right next to the nut, and this is the key. So it's just like a little shortcut thing that I use all the time, because like that's where you're usually playing. And piano is super easy, because if you just have all the numbers here, it's just the same everywhere on the piano, no matter where you go. With the guitar, there's like nothing looks the same because there's no black keys. So with piano, you always know where you are. So if you just know the numbers from this, you know all the way up all the way up and down the piano. You can play all the numbers for everything, and it's really easy. So the thing that's helpful is, because you're doing everything in numbers instead of note names, is that the qualities of the numbers have a kind of similar feel between the keys. So like if you like do a solo or whatever and keep focusing on the 2nd degree of when you're soloing in C, if you wanted to change the key for whatever reason, you just look at what the 2nd thing is in E, which is the key that you change to, and you focus on that note, and then you've just like translated the same feeling to a different key, which is super useful. Like you can use that with diatonic theory and everything. So like if you focus on the 2nd chord and you want to change the key, you can just focus on the 2nd chord again on a different key. It's just all used because the numbers are just translatable between all the keys. It's just super useful compared to knowing like what all the chords are and all the note names and everything. So yeah, now to put all this stuff together, so if you want to understand like what key a song is in, or like kind of how they did it, or like what they were thinking about when they were doing it, I'll run you through like this one and another one, and it should make a bit more sense. It should put all the things together. So you have a song like this, these are the chords. Ideally you want to be able to like think of the chords, like listen to a song using your ear and be able to find the chords by just playing around different chords and find out what the chords are. But if you can't, and obviously chords are much harder to figure out by just playing them around than a melody by just using your ear. But if you can't, you just use these little song books or tab things that people use all the time. to help you out with your ear. But obviously if you have a song stuck in your head and you're trying to play it, you don't have something like this. So you have to get good at the skill of being able to like hear a chord in your head and like mess around on the guitar or piano for ages to try and figure out what that chord actually is that you heard. But so for the songs that have already been done, these are easy, you can just get these up. So let's look at this song and see what they've done. So you're trying to figure out what key it's in. So in order to do that, you want to try and find the patterns of in the diatonic scale and try and use them to help you figure out what key it is. So you see in diatonic system, they have the 1, 4, and 5 as a major and the 2, 3, and 6 as a minor. So you can use that to kind of help you figure out what key it is. So you see between the major and the 4 major and the 5 major, there's they're both major, and there's, you know, between the 4 and the 5, there's a gap of like it's skipped one note, so there's a gap of a 2 there. So you can look for that and try and find 2 major chords that have a gap of 2. So like or you can do the same kind of thing, which is try and find a gap of 2 between 2 minor chords. So you try and look for that in the song. It should help you figure out what key it is in. And you can use all these by knowing which numbers are in a certain key to figure out which key you're in. But usually the chords help you more. Okay, so let's look through this. So there's a G, there's a D, there's an E minor, there's a B, and it's pretty hard because there's no real gap for a 1 here in this in terms of the minors and majors, which is because you're looking for a gap of a 2, like for 2 major chords, the 4 and the 5. So you're trying to find the 4 and the 5 in this, and you can't really find it yet. And there's a 2 and 3 you can't really find because there's not enough minor chords either. So then you go to the chorus and you see there's a gap of 2 there, nice one. And so you think that's probably going to be the 4 and the 5 because you see the gap between the C and the D is a 2. So that's probably going to be the 4 and the 5 there. So if that is so, the 4 and the 5 there, you have to figure out what key that actually is. So you have to find out which key C is actually the 4. So you look through all of these and you'll find where C is the 4 is actually here in the G. So you see that's what key it is. So you can kind of tell that this is in the key of G. And then you can do something like that. And then you can like label the chords. So you see in the key of D, the 5 chord is a major 5 chord, and then that's a 1 chord, and so on. And then that's a diatonic, a non-diatonic, because you see in the major scale a B is a 3, and in the diatonic system that's meant to be a minor, but it's a major because it's a B7, which is like a major with a flat 7 on the end of it. So you would do, that's going to be a major 3, which is a non-diatonic. Okay, and then you keep going, and you'll also find that in the second page of it, they have a bridge that has non-diatonics as well, which is a D minor, because you see from this, there's a D in the key of G. The D is a 5, and that's meant to be a major. So you would do, this is actually going to be a minor 5, and then they do a 1. So in the key of G still, that's going to be a 1, that's going to be a 4, and that's going to be so on. You just keep doing it, and you can figure out, it makes a bit more sense now that they used keys and they use non-diatonic chords. And then so here's another example of how to find the key of a song. In this song, the key actually changes, so that's the difference in this song. So again, we're looking for the difference of 2 between 2 major chords, or the difference of 2 between 2 minor chords. So we look through here and we see we've got an E and an F sharp, which is a difference of 2 because it goes E, F, F sharp, and they're both major chords because the 7 chord is just an extension of the major chord, because the formula of a 7 chord is a 1, 3, 5 flat 7, and the formula of a major chord is a 1, 3, 5. So the flat 7 of the 7 chord is just an extension. So then we've got a difference of 2 here, and then and they're both major chords, so we know that that's probably going to be a 4 and a 5. And then we've just got to look here to see which where the E is a 4 and the F sharp is a 5. And you can see that's the key of B. So then we can label everything and we can say this is in the key of B. But note, if we looked here and we saw the difference of 2 between two minor chords, which is another thing that we were meant to be looking for, we'd think that this is going to be the 2 chord and the 3 chord. But you'll see that doesn't really work out. And also, it should show, because there's a major chord and a minor chord of the same root, which is B, you'll see that there's some non-diatonic chords happening here. So the Beatles like to do this all the time to kind of like make it more interesting, this song. And the big thing in this song is it really changes keys, and you can notice it because the song really does sound different in different sections. So there's like kind of a really big jump in the feel of the song between the verse and the chorus, and that's because the key change is happening. So there's 3 chords here. This is basically an A chord, and then there's an inversion of it because the C is just the C sharp is the 3 of the A, and then a D. So you're not really sure what key it is because there's just 2 real chords happening, but you can just guess that it's either in the key of A or the key of D. So if it was in the key of A, this would be the 1 chord, this would be the 4 chord. If it was in the key of D, this would be the 1 chord, this would be the 5 chord. But the key thing that the Beatles do all the time is they use the 5 chord of the key that they're going into to help them transition between the keys. So that can help you to figure out actually what key it is, and it can help you transition keys when you're writing a song yourself. So you see here, they're using the key of E as the last, they're using the chord of E, they're using an E major, as the last chord of this section, which is actually the 5 of the key that they're going into, which is A, which you can kind of derive, which you can tell now because we're choosing between D and A, and this is the 5 chord that's going into the new key. So in the key of A, E is the 5 chord, and they do the same trick when they're going out. So they're going back into the key of B. So, and then F sharp 7 is the 5 of the key of B. So it's a trick that they do all the time to transition between keys. They use the 5 of the key they're going into to change the keys as like a transition chord. Cool. So that should help you to figure out what the keys are of the songs that you're learning or doing yourself. And if you're trying to find the key of like a melody or a little tune that you've heard, if you're trying to find the key of that, the first thing you have to do is you have to reproduce it on an instrument to find out what the actual notes are. So you just muck around on the guitar and the piano, playing all these little different notes to try and match the note that you heard in your head or that you've heard from someone else that you're trying to find the key of. You first have to reproduce it on the instrument. So you have to keep mucking around on different notes until you find that. And then once you know what the notes are of the melody, you try and find the key that those notes match best with. So like if you heard a G and then a D and then an F sharp and then a B, you're probably going to be in this key here, which is the key of D. But also you could use the stuff that we talked about earlier by using the diatonic system of chords to figure out which key you're in. So if you're if you hear the melody and you try and play like some of the chords that you heard in the song, or you just try and make some chords that match the melody that you heard, and you'll be playing like a major chord and then a minor chord, and then you try and figure out from the diatonic system which key that is. So like if you have this melody in your head and you're still not really sure, even from the notes that you've got from here, it's like maybe between 2 keys or something, then you can try and play some chords over that melody, and then use, based on what chords you've chosen, what sounds best with the melody, then that will give you the key that you're in by using the chords part of the diatonic system. So like if you played like a G major and then a C major and then a D major from the melody that you've heard, that's probably going to be the key of G, because that's going to be the 1 4 5, which is the G, C, and D of the key of G. So that's probably going to be what your key is. So you can use the diatonic system, and you can use all these numbers here of the different keys to help you figure out what key the melody, the little melody is, even if you don't have the chords. But kind of opposite to everything I've said here, it's your ear that's really the king. It doesn't matter really that much about the theory. Like if you're playing something and it sounds good and it doesn't really, you still, after all this stuff that I've taught, you don't really know what key you're in, or the keys like change so many times. That doesn't really matter. You don't have to understand it for it to sound good. It doesn't have to fit a key system or something. It just has to sound good. There's so many songs like the Beatles have made that no one knows what key it is, and like that's fine. It doesn't have to make sense in order for it to be a song. It might even be better if it doesn't make sense, or if it's up to interpretation. It's just your ear that is the ultimate decider of everything, not the keys, not the diatonic system, not anything. It's just all up to your ear.